welcome to this explainer. We're diving straight into Genesis chapter 6, which is, honestly, one of the wildest and most misunderstood passages in all of ancient literature. It remarkably compresses potentially thousands of years of profound, earth-altering events into just a few short verses. Because there is so much staggering historical and spiritual weight packed into such a tiny space, we really need to visually expand it to wrap our heads around what actually happened during this era. We aren't just looking at ancient history here. We are looking at a literal cosmic rebellion. To unpack all of this, we're going chronologically. First, we'll look at the centuries compressed in Genesis. Then, the rebellion of the Watchers, the rise of the Nephilim and global corruption, God's judgment and grief, Noah and the floating box, and finally, we'll look beyond Genesis into the book of Enoch. Section 1. Centuries compressed in Genesis.
Think about how we got here. We've gone from that initial disobedience in Eden to jealousy, murder, lying, and just compounding human corruption. Over centuries of slow decay, spanning the days of Jared, Enoch, Methuselah, and Lamech, humanity's growth violently collided with spiritual history. And that leads us right to the 16th century after Eden, the days of Noah.
Section 2. Rebellion of the Watchers.
This incredibly compressed timeline builds into something completely unnatural. We're shifting from regular human failure to a massive cosmic crime. Genesis intentionally contrasts the spiritual sons of God with the human daughters of men. We're talking about angels crossing God's fiercely established boundary by materializing actual physical bodies to interact and reproduce with human women. We know from other parts of Scripture that angels can appear physically, but this went far, far beyond a simple visit.
The text actually highlights that they simply took any women they chose. Just imagine that for a second. Some of these women likely already belong to other men. It really shows us that angels aren't just mindless robots. They have distinct personalities, desires, and free will. We know from the book of Job that there were heavenly gatherings where God interacted with these beings, even Satan. They knew God's authority perfectly well, yet they still plotted and actively chose rebellion.
Section 3. Nephilim and global corruption.
So, what is the horrifying result of this illicit union between the spiritual and physical realms? The Nephilim. Whatever these angels did, it was physical enough for human reproduction to occur, leading to a completely unnatural offspring. Now, you might be wondering, were these guys just extraordinarily large human warriors? Kind of like Goliath? Or maybe even bigger? While Genesis doesn't hand us their exact tape measure dimensions, it does give us a major, deeply unsettling clue about what they were really like.
The text calls them mighty giants and famous figures of renown. Basically, they were ancient celebrities. Think about human nature today. We obsessively imitate the people we admire, right? Powerful influencers, athletes, stars. Imagine living in an ancient world where the most powerful beings were also the absolute most violent and corrupt. Because human beings naturally imitated these beings, global corruption accelerated drastically.
It's a devastating domino effect that connects Genesis 3 straight into Genesis 6. Satan rebels in heaven, other angels follow suit, the Nephilim arise, and boom, human culture violently corrupts. The heavenly rebellion didn't stay in heaven. It entirely infected humanity, which absolutely forced a divine response.
Section 4. God's judgment and grief.
Faced with a civilization whose thoughts and intentions were continually evil all the time, the Creator has to step in. God determines the earth must be cleansed. But look at what this reveals about God's personality. It's frankly heartbreaking. He isn't some emotionally detached clockmaker up in the sky. He fiercely loves what he created. Watching the humanity he loves become utterly consumed by violence deeply, deeply grieved his heart. He didn't just see a few bad actions. He saw a civilization whose very thought processes were broken.
God then issues a 120-year decree, stating, "His spirit shall not always strive with man." Now, while a lot of people think this was a 120-year countdown clock to the flood, it's highly likely this represents God's new limit on human lifespans going forward. Think about it. Figures like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob lived past 120, and eventually Moses lived exactly 120 years.
Section 5. Noah and the floating box.
Amid this horrific global depravity, we find an incredible contrast. One man, Noah, found favor with God. Noah wasn't completely sinless, but he was blameless. He chose to follow the faithful tradition of his great-great-grandfather Enoch and walked with God. And when God told him to build an ark, I need you to completely throw out every children's book image you have of a cute little boat with a rounded bow and giraffes sticking their necks out. Noah was building a massive, 3-story, pitch-covered wooden chest designed for one thing: preserving life. It was absolutely not a boat to navigate. It had no rudder, no sail, no steering system. It was, quite literally, a giant floating box.
Which brings up some really fun logistical questions. Since Genesis originally describes vegetation as the diet for animals, you gotta wonder, did they remain vegetarian inside the ark, or did God provide a specific temporary arrangement for their survival in this massive box? Scripture doesn't explicitly tell us, but imagining the logistics of feeding that floating zoo is incredible to think about.
When the judgment finally hit, it was total. Out of the entire corrupted earth, exactly 8 people, Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, and their wives, were preserved in that chest. This is massively significant because every single human being alive today descends from this incredibly small group, restarting humanity entirely through the righteous line of Seth.
Section 6. Beyond Genesis, Book of Enoch.
Genesis 6 gives us the overarching framework of all these events, but it does leave out some of the granular details. This is where ancient Jewish traditions step in to fill out some fascinating extra-biblical context about the heavenly rebellion. While it's not canon for most Christian traditions, the Book of Enoch names these rebellious angels the Watchers. It states there were 200 of them who descended on Mount Hermon, and chronicles their activity across generations. What's completely wild is that this text was known and utilized by biblical writers. Jude directly quotes a prophecy from Enoch, and both Jude and Peter describe these exact angels who abandoned their proper dwelling and were imprisoned for judgment.
If you want to dive even deeper into this extra-biblical text and uncover the full mystery of the Watchers, you have to go listen to the full podcast episode of Between the Verses. It's entitled The Days of Noah, Angels, Nephilim, and the Coming Flood, The Beginning of Humanity Outside Eden, Part 3, and you can find it right now on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. Jesus warned that the last days would be just like the days of Noah, people eating, drinking, and living totally ordinary lives, completely blind to the massive corruption underneath it all, right up until judgment arrived. So it leaves us with a pretty heavy question. Are we living in a similar time of willful blindness today?